What I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you see money, wealth, and your entire financial future. Right now, at this very moment, there's a game being played all around you. The ultra-wealthy are playing it masterfully. They're winning, accumulating billions, building dynasties, and securing freedom for generations. And you? You're not losing because you're working less hard. You're losing because you don't even know the game exists. The wealth gap separating societies isn't about hard work, luck, or even income level. It's about understanding a strategic system that operates according to specific rules. The wealthy know these rules intuitively. They breathe them. They live them. Meanwhile, the general population remains completely unaware, trapped in a cycle of trading time for money, believing that's just how life works. But here's the truth that changes everything. The game is winnable. The rules aren't secret. They're documented, public, teachable. Warren Buffett publishes them annually. Elon Musk's strategies are filed with the SEC. The mathematics of compound interest can be learned in 15 minutes. The problem isn't access to information. The problem is that nobody told you to look for it. Nobody told you the game was happening. Today, I'm going to reveal the core rules of the money game. I'm going to show you exactly how the ultra-wealthy play it. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to start playing it yourself, starting right now. But before we go further, understand this. If you're serious about changing your financial reality, about moving from spectator to player, you need to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button. Because this channel exists for one reason, to give you the insider knowledge that separates the wealthy from everyone else. Every week I break down strategies, mindsets, and real-world case studies that traditional finance education will never teach you. So if you're ready to stop playing the game wrong and start playing it to win, subscribe now. Hit the notification bell. This isn't optional if you're serious about wealth. This is your entry ticket to the game. Let me tell you a story about two brothers, both brilliant, both hard-working, both starting with almost nothing. This story illustrates exactly why knowing the rules matters more than talent, effort, or even opportunity. James and Robert grew up in the same middle-class household in suburban Ohio in the 1970s. Their father was a factory worker, their mother a teacher. Neither parent understood investing. Money was something you earned, saved, and spent carefully. That was the entire philosophy passed down to both sons. James, the older brother, followed the traditional path perfectly. He excelled in school, earned a scholarship to a good state university, graduated with a degree in engineering. By 25, he was earning $70,000 annually at a respectable manufacturing firm. Over the next 30 years, James did everything right according to conventional wisdom. He saved diligently, putting away 15% of his income. He maxed out his 401k. He bought a modest house. He avoided debt like the plague, paying off his mortgage early. He drove reliable used cars. He lived below his means. By age 55, James had accumulated about $1.2 million in retirement savings. Comfortable, secure, but nowhere near wealthy. Robert, the younger brother, started differently. He graduated from the same state university, but with significantly more student debt because he'd pursued a graduate degree in business. For the first 3 years after graduation, he earned less than James, about $50,000 annually working at a small investment firm. But Robert had learned something James never encountered: the rules of the money game. At age 28, Robert made his first unconventional move. He purchased a small duplex in a developing neighborhood using an FHA loan requiring only 3.5% down, about $8,000 of his own money. The property cost $230,000, meaning he controlled an asset worth nearly 30 times his initial investment through leverage. He lived in one unit and rented out the other. The rental income covered 60% of his mortgage payment. Within 18 months, as the neighborhood developed, the property appreciated to $270,000. Robert didn't sell. Instead, he did a cash-out refinance, extracting $40,000 in equity, while keeping the property and its rental income. He used that $40,000 as down payments on 2 more properties, each purchased with similar leverage ratios. By age 32, Robert controlled 4 properties worth a combined $950,000. His total invested capital, about $60,000. His equity position, $220,000. The rental income from his properties exceeded his living expenses. But here's where the story gets interesting, where the rules of the game become crystal clear. James, at this same point, had been saving diligently for 7 years. He'd accumulated about $80,000 in his retirement accounts and had paid down his mortgage to about $180,000 in remaining balance on a house worth $250,000. His net worth stood at approximately $150,000. He felt he was doing well being responsible, following the plan. Robert, by contrast, understood capital allocation. Each property he owned generated cash flow. But instead of using that cash flow for lifestyle upgrades, he treated it as capital to redeploy. At age 35, he sold his original duplex in a 1031 exchange, a tax-deferred transaction allowing him to roll all proceeds into new property without triggering capital gains taxes. He used the proceeds to purchase a small apartment building with 12 units. That single property generated $18,000 annually in positive cash flow after all expenses. Robert took that $18,000 and did something James would have considered insane. He used it as proof of income to secure additional financing for more real estate. By age 40, Robert's real estate portfolio had grown to 17 properties, with a combined value exceeding $4 million. His personal debt was high, about $2.4 million in mortgages, but his equity position stood at $1.6 million, and his properties generated over $120,000 in annual passive income. Meanwhile, James continued his steady path. By age 40, his retirement accounts had grown to approximately $300,000. He'd paid off his mortgage completely, giving him full ownership of a home worth $320,000. His net worth, $620,000. Impressive by most standards, but less than half of his younger brother's equity position and generating zero passive income. The story accelerates from here. Robert understood another rule James never learned. The wealthy don't sell appreciating assets and trigger tax events. Instead, they borrow against them. At age 45, Robert's real estate portfolio had appreciated to $7 million in total value. Rather than selling properties and paying capital gains taxes on $2.3 million in gains, he executed a sophisticated refinancing strategy across his portfolio, extracting $800,000 in tax-free loan proceeds. He used half of that capital to invest in a private equity fund focused on medical office buildings. He used the other half to purchase shares in 3 early-stage technology companies through an angel investing network he'd accessed through his real estate attorney. This diversification moved him beyond real estate into multiple asset classes, each selected for appreciation potential and tax efficiency. By age 55, the same age where James had accumulated his $1.2 million in retirement savings, Robert's net worth exceeded $11 million. His real estate portfolio alone was worth $9.2 million, with about $3.1 million in remaining debt, giving him over $6 million in real estate equity. His private equity and angel investments had grown to approximately $2.8 million. His annual passive income from all sources exceeded $400,000. And here's the crucial detail. Because most of his wealth existed as unrealized appreciation in assets, his actual tax burden remained remarkably low. Same family, same starting point, same middle-class upbringing. The only difference, Robert learned the rules of the money game. James never knew the game existed. Now let me be absolutely clear about something before we continue. If you're watching this and thinking this is just another get-rich-quick scheme or motivational fluff, you're missing the point entirely. What I'm sharing with you are the actual documented strategies that separate wealth builders from income earners. These aren't theories. They're the mathematical and strategic principles that billionaires use, that millionaires use, that anyone building lasting wealth must use. And if you want to keep learning these principles, if you want case studies like this every single week, you need to hit that like button right now. The algorithm rewards engagement, and that engagement determines who else gets to see this information. So if you found value in Robert's story, if you're starting to see how the game actually works, show it. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because the rules of the money game aren't gatekept by some secret society. They're gatekept by ignorance, By the fact that most people simply never encounter this information. Let's break down the actual rules that Robert understood and James didn't. These are the core principles that govern how wealth is actually built. The first rule, the foundation of everything. Money doesn't work by earning money through labor. Money works by making other money through compounding. This is the single most important concept in wealth building, and it's the one most completely misunderstood by the general population. When James saved 15% of his $70,000 salary, he was thinking in linear terms. More savings equals more wealth. Save for 30 years, retire comfortably. It's a reasonable plan, it works. But it operates in an entirely different mathematical universe than what Robert understood. Robert recognized that $1,000 isn't just $1,000. It's a seed that grows exponentially over time. When you invest $1,000 at 7% annual returns, basic compound interest mathematics dictate that money doubles roughly every 10 years. In 10 years, it becomes $2,000. In 20 years, $4,000. In 30 years, $8,000. In 40 years, $16,000. From a single $1,000 investment, never adding another dollar, you create $16,000 through the mathematics of exponential growth. But here's where it gets truly powerful, where the game reveals itself. Compound interest works as either wealth builder or wealth destroyer. It compounds for the rich, while it compounds against the poor. When Robert used leverage to control $230,000 in real estate, with only $8,000 of his own capital, he didn't just buy a property. He bought access to compound appreciation on the full asset value. If that property appreciates at 5% annually, a conservative estimate for real estate in developing areas, the appreciation is calculated on $230,000, not on Robert's $8,000 investment. 5% of $230,000 is $11,500 in year one appreciation. That's a 143% return on his actual invested capital. In 1 year, James, by contrast, was earning perhaps 7% annually on his retirement investments. 7% on $80,000 is $5,600. Robert earned more than double that amount on a single leveraged property, using a fraction of the invested capital. This illustrates the mathematical reality of leverage, which brings us to the second rule. Leverage isn't debt in the way most people understand it. Leverage is the billionaire's blueprint for wealth multiplication. The average person is taught to avoid debt at all costs. Debt is dangerous. Debt is a burden. Pay off your mortgage early. Never carry credit card balances. This advice is completely correct for consumer debt, debt used to purchase depreciating assets or fund consumption. A car loan at 6% interest on a vehicle that depreciates 20%. The moment you drive it off the lot is wealth destruction. A credit card balance at 19% interest used to buy clothing and electronics is financial suicide. But the wealthy have inverted the relationship with debt. They've weaponized it for wealth multiplication. They understand that debt used to acquire appreciating assets that generate returns exceeding the cost of debt is not a burden, it's a tool. Let me give you a real-world example that perfectly illustrates this principle. Elon Musk, the wealthiest person on the planet, has pledged approximately 238 million of his 715 million Tesla shares, roughly 1/3 of his total holdings, as collateral for personal loans. Think about that for a moment. The richest man in the world borrows money rather than selling his assets. Why? Because selling would trigger capital gains taxes of 20 to 37% on billions in appreciation. Borrowing, by contrast, provides access to cash without triggering any taxable event. Loans aren't considered income. When Musk needs $50 million for a new venture or personal use, he doesn't sell shares and pay $15 million in taxes. He borrows against those shares at perhaps 4% annual interest, maintains his ownership stake, continues benefiting from share appreciation, and pays $2 million annually in interest, a fraction of what taxes would have cost. But it goes further. That borrowed capital can be deployed into new ventures generating returns exceeding the 4% borrowing cost. If Musk invests that $50 million into a business generating 10% annual returns, he earns $5 million while paying $2 million in interest, a net gain of $3 million, all while maintaining his original Tesla position. This is how the game is played at the highest levels. When Musk acquired Twitter for $44 billion, he didn't write a check. He leveraged a record $12.5 billion margin loan backed by Tesla shares as part of the financing package. Bill Gates maintains nearly 60% of his $107 billion in wealth in equities, using diversified leverage across multiple sectors through cascade investment. Larry Ellison, Jim Walton, and 32 other billionaires on the Forbes 400 list pledged their public stock holdings as collateral for lines of credit. For wealthy individuals, borrowing against appreciating assets to invest in higher returning opportunities is standard practice, not recklessness. This is the game, this is the rule. And it's completely invisible to people who were taught that all debt is bad. Robert understood this intuitively. Every property he purchased used maximum leverage. He never paid cash for real estate, even when he could afford to, because paying cash meant tying up capital that could be deployed across multiple properties. 20% down on 5 properties creates more wealth than 100% down on 1 property, assuming positive cash flow and appreciation. James, by contrast, celebrated paying off his mortgage early. He'd eliminated debt, which felt psychologically satisfying and financially secure. But in doing so, he'd trapped $320,000 in equity in a single property generating zero income. That same capital, deployed across leveraged real estate, could have controlled $1.6 million in assets and generated passive income. Instead, it sat dormant. The third rule of the money game. Capital allocation is the CEO's most important job, and you are the CEO of your own wealth. Warren Buffett has stated this principle explicitly. Capital allocation is the CEO's most important job. This isn't about running day-to-day operations or managing employees. It's about deciding where money flows to achieve maximum returns. The difference in capital allocation skill explains more of the wealth disparity than any other single factor. McKinsey conducted extensive research on corporate capital allocation and found that companies in the top third of capital reallocation, those shifting an average of 56% of capital across business units over 15 years, earned 30% higher total returns to shareholders annually than companies in the bottom third. 30% higher returns simply from being better at deciding where money should flow. The same principle applies to personal wealth. The wealthy continually evaluate where their capital is deployed and reallocate it toward higher return opportunities. They don't fall in love with investments. They don't hold assets out of sentimentality or inertia. They make cold, calculated decisions about optimal capital deployment. Buffett exemplifies this principle perfectly. When he assumed control of Berkshire Hathaway in the 1960s, the company was a failing textile manufacturer with a corporate net worth of $22 million. Buffett faced a decision: continue investing in the declining textile business or reallocate capital elsewhere. He chose reallocation. He systematically shifted capital away from textiles and into insurance companies, then used insurance float to invest in equities and acquire businesses. This wasn't emotional. It wasn't traditional. The textile workers lost jobs. The original business died. But the capital was preserved and redeployed into value-creating enterprises. Today, Berkshire Hathaway is worth over $800 billion. That transformation wasn't achieved through luck or market timing. It was achieved through disciplined capital allocation over decades. Jeff Bezos applied this same principle to Amazon. In the early 2000s, Amazon was primarily an online bookstore generating modest profits. Bezos could have extracted those profits as dividends, rewarding shareholders and himself. Instead, he reallocated capital aggressively. He built Amazon Web Services, which now generates over $100 billion annually and represents the majority of Amazon's profit. He invested in Prime Video, logistics infrastructure, Whole Foods acquisition, and international expansion. Each decision was a capital allocation choice: take profits now or reinvest for future growth. Bezos consistently chose reinvestment. Even failed projects like the Fire Phone generated valuable data and capabilities that informed future investments. Amazon's rise from online bookstore to trillion-dollar empire is a masterclass in capital allocation. Robert practiced this same discipline on a smaller scale. Every time a property appreciated or generated cash flow, he faced a choice: extract money for lifestyle upgrades or redeploy it into additional assets. He chose redeployment every single time. That discipline, repeated hundreds of times over 3 decades, created an $11 million net worth from an $8,000 initial investment. James never thought in these terms. His capital allocation decisions were passive. His paycheck went to the same destinations every month: savings, mortgage, living expenses. He never actively evaluated whether his mortgage should be paid off or whether that capital could generate better returns elsewhere. He never considered extracting equity from his appreciating home to invest in higher return opportunities. His capital allocation was on autopilot, following conventional wisdom. Here's a critical question for you right now as you're listening to this. Where is your capital currently deployed? Do you even know? Most people can't answer that question. They know their salary, they know their savings account balance, but they can't tell you their capital allocation across asset classes, what returns each allocation is generating, or which allocations should be increased or decreased based on opportunity and risk. If you can't answer that question, you're not playing the game. You're a spectator watching your money sit idle while others deploy capital strategically. And if you want to learn how to become a player, how to start making active capital allocation decisions that build real wealth, stay subscribed to this channel. Because I break down specific strategies, specific asset classes, specific decision frameworks every single week. The 4th rule: time is not money. Time is freedom through money. This rule represents a fundamental inversion of how most people think. The general population believes time equals money. You trade your hours for dollars. Work more hours, earn more money. The wealthy understand the opposite. Money buys back time, and that freed time can be deployed into higher value activities. Successful wealthy individuals recognize that every decision has an associated opportunity cost, the value of the best alternative foregone. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical decision-making that compounds over a lifetime. A wealthy entrepreneur might pay premium prices for a direct flight rather than saving money with a layover, because the 3 hours saved could close a $1 million deal. A business owner hires a plumber to fix a leak in 1 hour, rather than spending 3 hours learning to do it themselves. Because those 3 hours deployed toward client acquisition generate more value than the $200 saved. The general population inverts this reasoning. They focus intensely on saving $50 through coupon clipping, while ignoring opportunities to invest that same time in building passive income streams. They spend 5 hours comparison shopping to save $70 on a purchase, which values their time at $14 per hour. Then they wonder why their financial situation never improves. Robert internalized this principle early. When his rental properties needed repairs, he never did the work himself, even though he could have saved money. His time was allocated to finding new properties, analyzing deals, building relationships with lenders and real estate agents. Those activities generated exponentially more value than fixing toilets and painting walls. James did the opposite. He took pride in doing his own home maintenance, his own yard work, his own car repairs. He saved thousands of dollars over the years through this approach, but he never calculated the opportunity cost, the wealth he could have built if those hundreds of hours were deployed into learning real estate investing, building a side business, or developing high-income skills. Warren Buffett once noted that time is finite and cannot be replenished, making it the scarcest resource. Yet most people waste it on low-return activities while refusing to spend money that would free up higher-value time. This single inversion, treating time as the scarce resource and money as the abundant one, changes everything about how you operate. The 5th rule, and this is where the game becomes brutally clear: income generation versus asset appreciation are different games entirely. This rule separates middle-class earners from truly wealthy individuals. Most people optimize for income. They seek higher salaries, better jobs, more hours, additional side hustles. The wealthy, by contrast, optimize for asset appreciation. They make money from assets increasing in value, not from active labor. Here's why this matters enormously. When you earn $100,000 in salary, you immediately pay 35 to 37% in federal taxes, plus state and local taxes, plus FICA. Your actual take-home might be $63,000. You worked for that money, gave up your time and lost $37,000 to taxation. When your stock holdings appreciate $100,000 in value, you pay 0% in taxes until you sell. 0. The appreciation is called unrealized gains, and unrealized gains aren't taxable events. This creates a radically different financial reality for those who understand it. This explains the ProPublica investigation that shocked millions of Americans. The investigation found that billionaires like Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, and Jeff Bezos paid remarkably little in taxes relative to their immense wealth. Buffett's effective tax rate over a 5-year period was just 0.1% of his wealth growth. Musk paid a true tax rate of 3.27%. Bezos, in 2007 and 2011, paid zero federal income tax despite his wealth increasing by billions. The public response was outrage. The assumption was tax evasion or loopholes. But these billionaires weren't breaking laws. They were playing a different game entirely, the asset appreciation game, not the income generation game. Here's how it works, the strategy known as buy, borrow, die. Buy capital assets like stocks and real estate and never sell them. Holding assets avoids income taxation on sales. Borrow against those appreciating assets at interest rates considerably lower than income tax rates. Loans aren't taxed as income, so you access cash without triggering taxable events. Hold the assets until death, when a step-up in basis zeroes out all accumulated gains and allows heirs to inherit assets tax-free. It's completely legal, it's documented in the tax code, and it's how generational wealth is preserved and multiplied. Musk doesn't sell Tesla shares to access cash, he borrows against them. Bezos didn't take a salary from Amazon for years. He lived off loans backed by his appreciating stock. Gates maintains massive equity positions in his portfolio. He doesn't convert to cash and trigger taxes. Robert operated a scaled-down version of this strategy. His wealth existed primarily in real estate equity, which appreciated without taxation. When he needed cash, he refinanced properties and extracted equity through loans, tax-free cash. He never sold properties outside of 1031 exchanges, which deferred all capital gains taxes. His actual tax burden remained low despite building $11 million in wealth, because the wealth existed as unrealized appreciation. James, by contrast, optimized purely for income. Every raise, every bonus, every dollar earned was immediately taxed at ordinary income rates. He had no asset appreciation offsetting his tax burden. His wealth building was linear and heavily taxed. Robert's wealth building was exponential and minimally taxed. Same effort, different game, vastly different outcomes. Now, I want you to pause and think about your own situation for a moment. Are you optimizing for income or asset appreciation? When you think about building wealth, are you focused on getting a raise, working more hours, finding a higher-paying job? Or are you focused on acquiring assets that appreciate in value while generating passive income? Most people never even ask this question because they don't know there are two different games. They're running hard on the income treadmill, wondering why they never get ahead. Never realizing that the wealthy aren't on a treadmill at all. They're building machines that generate wealth automatically. If you're starting to see the distinction, if you're starting to understand that your entire approach might be focused on the wrong game, then leave a comment right now. Tell me, what's your biggest takeaway so far? What's the one rule that's making you rethink your entire financial strategy? Because I read every comment, and your insights help me understand what topics to cover next. This channel grows through engagement, through conversations with people who are serious about changing their financial reality. So don't be passive. Join the conversation. Leave a comment. Let me show you how these rules play out in the real world with someone you've definitely heard of, Mark Zuckerberg. In 2006, Yahoo offered to acquire Facebook for $1 billion. Mark Zuckerberg was 22 years old. Facebook had been operating for just 2 years. $1 billion represented more wealth than most people see in 10 lifetimes, and Zuckerberg said no. His board was furious. Investors were shocked. The media portrayed him as arrogant and irrational. But Zuckerberg understood something that his critics didn't. He wasn't playing the income generation game. He was playing the asset appreciation game, and selling would have ended it. By rejecting that offer, Zuckerberg retained ownership of an asset he believed would appreciate dramatically. He was right. Within 4 years, Facebook's valuation exceeded $50 billion. Today, Meta is worth over $1 trillion. Zuckerberg's personal stake is worth over $170 billion. But here's what's even more instructive: how Zuckerberg deployed capital after Facebook became valuable. Rather than building every capability from scratch, he used strategic acquisitions to accelerate growth. In 2012, Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion when Instagram had just 13 employees and zero revenue. The media called it insane overpayment. Today, Instagram alone is worth an estimated $140 billion. In 2014, Facebook acquired WhatsApp for $19 billion. Again, media outrage. Again, brilliant capital allocation. WhatsApp now has over 2 billion users and generates massive strategic value. These weren't lucky guesses. They were capital allocation decisions based on a simple framework. Acquire assets with strong network effects and user growth. Integrate them into Facebook's ecosystem. Let time and scale multiply value. Zuckerberg also diversified through iconic capital into technology startups, real estate and education investments, spreading capital across multiple appreciation vehicles. Then, in 2015, Zuckerberg and his wife announced they would donate 99% of their Facebook shares over their lifetimes to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. The commitment represents approximately $170 billion in eventual charitable giving. The media portrayed this as pure altruism, which it may partially be. But it also illustrates another rule. Smart philanthropic structures can simultaneously serve tax and strategic purposes while building reputation capital. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is structured as an LLC, not a traditional foundation, giving Zuckerberg more flexibility in how funds are deployed, including political lobbying and for-profit investments that align with the initiative's mission. The donated shares generate tax deductions, the structure preserves influence over how capital is allocated, and the public perception enhances Zuckerberg's reputation and legacy. This is capital allocation at the highest level, where financial strategy, tax efficiency, strategic influence, and personal legacy all align. It's not just about making money, it's about deploying capital in ways that multiply value across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Compare this to how the average person thinks about money. They earn a paycheck, pay taxes, cover expenses, save the remainder. Capital allocation decisions are minimal or non-existent. Money flows passively through predetermined channels. No strategic deployment, no multiplication of value, no realization that money is a tool that can be actively directed toward specific, measurable outcomes. Another perfect example, Bill Gates and Cascade Investment. Gates maintains approximately $107 billion through Cascade, his private holding company. His strategy is remarkably straightforward. Maintain over 60% of investments in equities across diversified sectors, including technology, healthcare, finance, real estate, and energy. Think about that for a moment. One of the wealthiest people in history keeps the majority of his wealth in stocks, not bonds or cash or ultra-conservative investments. Why? Because equities generate superior long-term returns, and Gates has a long-time horizon. He doesn't need safety, he needs growth. So he aggressively deploys capital into appreciating assets and lets compounding work over decades. Gates also demonstrates that enormous wealth doesn't translate to huge inheritance for children. He's publicly committed to giving less than 1% of his wealth to his children, reasoning that most of his net worth came from incredible luck and good fortune rather than their earning. Each child will inherit approximately $10 million, substantial, but a tiny fraction of Gates's total wealth. This breaks the generational wealth trap. Gates understands that giving children billions wouldn't teach them capital allocation skills. It would create dependence and entitlement. Instead, each generation must develop the ability to deploy capital strategically rather than simply inheriting passive wealth. This principle ensures that capital flows to those who understand how to multiply it, not to those who simply happen to be born into the right family. Now let's examine the psychological side of the money game, because understanding the rules intellectually isn't enough. You have to internalize them emotionally and behaviorally. The fundamental mindset gap between rich and poor isn't about intelligence or work ethic. It's about how money is conceptualized. The poor see money as something to be earned through labor. The rich see money as something that should work for them through strategic deployment. This conceptual difference creates entirely different behaviors. When poor and middle-class individuals receive raises, they engage in lifestyle inflation. Income increases by $10,000 annually, and spending increases proportionally. Bigger apartment, nicer car, more expensive vacations. The raise disappears into consumption, creating zero lasting wealth impact. Wealthy individuals do the opposite. They treat increased income as increased opportunity for investment. A $10,000 raise becomes $10,000 in capital to deploy into income-generating assets. The lifestyle remains constant, while the asset base expands. This discipline, repeated over decades, creates exponential wealth divergence. Research on financial literacy reveals the scope of this knowledge gap. Among adults in major emerging economies, only 23% of the poorest 40% are financially literate compared to 31% of the richest 60%. In major advanced economies, just 31% of adults are financially literate overall. Among those with only primary education, the rate is 31%. Among those with tertiary education, it jumps to 73%. This isn't primarily a failure of intelligence, it's a systemic failure to transmit knowledge about how money actually works. Schools teach mathematics but not capital allocation. Parents teach save your money but not invest your savings. Banks aggressively market consumer debt while hiding information about investment leverage. The result is that most people reach adulthood with zero understanding of compound interest, leverage, capital allocation, asset appreciation, or tax efficiency. They're thrown into a game with no knowledge of the rules, competing against players who've mastered those rules. The outcome is predetermined. Another psychological barrier: opportunity cost blindness. Most people focus on the absolute dollar cost of decisions while completely ignoring opportunity cost, the returns they sacrificed by not choosing an alternative. When a middle-class person refuses to pay for a $5,000 business course because it seems expensive, they ignore the $50,000 in potential income from skills acquired. When they refuse to hire a virtual assistant for $1,000 monthly because that's too much money, they ignore the $5,000 in potential returns they could generate with 20 hours freed up weekly. The wealthy explicitly calculate opportunity cost for every major decision. They know that time spent on low-return activities is time stolen from high-return opportunities. A wealthy business owner doesn't clean their own office to save $60. They pay someone to clean so they can spend those 2 hours on activities generating $600 in value. This single mental framework, consistently applied over decades, creates exponentially different outcomes. Every hour deployed strategically compounds. Every hour wasted on low-value activities is permanent loss. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource, yet most people treat it as infinite while treating money as scarce. The wealthy invert this completely. They treat time as scarce and money as abundant. This inversion drives completely different decision-making. Pay for convenience, outsource low-value tasks, invest in education and skill development, focus relentlessly on activities that multiply capital, protect time more aggressively than protecting money. Robert lived this principle. He never spent 3 hours to save $70. James did it constantly, believing he was being financially responsible. Over 30 years, those inverted time-value decisions created millions in wealth difference. Let's talk about specific strategic implementation, how to actually start playing the game correctly. Rule recognition number 1: timing doesn't work, but compounding does. The market timing debate has been definitively settled by research. Studies show that even investing at the worst possible market timing still dramatically outperforms holding cash. One famous study compared 4 investors over a 20-year period. Peter Perfect invested at the optimal moment every year, the absolute market bottom. Ashley Action invested on the first trading day each year without any timing. Larry Linger kept all money in treasury bills, never investing in stocks. and Rosie Rotten invested at the absolute worst moment every year, the market peak right before each crash. After 20 years, Peter Perfect had the highest returns as expected, but Ashley Action, who used zero market timing, came remarkably close to Peter's returns, within just a few percentage points. More importantly, both Peter and Ashley dramatically outperformed Larry, who never invested in appreciating assets. And even Rosie Rotten, with the worst possible timing imaginable, generated twice the wealth of Larry by simply being invested in appreciating assets. The lesson is crystal clear. Starting early with consistent investments in appreciating assets outperforms any market timing strategy. Even terrible timing beats not participating. Even horrific timing beats holding cash. This means that if you're 25 years old right now, you have an enormous advantage through time horizon alone. A 25-year-old investing $500 monthly has 40 years of compounding ahead. That's $480,000 in raw contributions. But with 7% average annual returns, that $500 monthly becomes over $1.3 million. With 10% returns, it becomes $3.1 million. A 45-year-old starting with $10,000 monthly is fighting against the mathematics of time. They can contribute much more per month, but they can't buy back 20 years of compounding. Time is the multiplier. Starting early is the advantage. Market timing is irrelevant. If you haven't started investing yet, start today. Not tomorrow, not next month, today. Open a brokerage account. Set up automatic investments. Choose low-cost index funds. The specific investment vehicle matters far less than the behavior of consistent investment over time. Rule recognition number 2. Real estate creates multi-millionaires through leverage. Real estate is the preferred vehicle for wealth multiplication among the wealthy because it combines multiple game rules simultaneously: leverage, appreciation, passive income, and tax advantages. The U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency data shows that home prices in the United States have consistently risen approximately 5.4% annually since 1991. That's not speculation. That's documented historical performance over 3 decades. Here's how leverage multiplies returns in real estate. An investor purchases a $500,000 property with a $100,000 down payment, which is 20% down. They now control a $500,000 asset with $100,000 of their own capital. The remaining $400,000 is financed through a mortgage. Now assume the property appreciates at 5% annually, in line with historical averages. That's $25,000 in appreciation in year 1. But notice, the appreciation is calculated on the full $500,000 asset value, not on the investor's $100,000 capital investment. The investor gained $25,000 in equity from a $100,000 investment, a 25% return. But it gets better. The property generates rental income. Assume the property rents for $3,000 monthly, generating $36,000 in annual gross rental income. After accounting for mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, maintenance and vacancies, assume total expenses of $28,000 annually. The property generates $8,000 in positive cash flow. So the investor earned $25,000 in appreciation plus $8,000 in cash flow, totaling $33,000 in year 1. That's a 33% return on the original $100,000 investment. And the investor didn't have to actively work for that return. The tenants paid down the mortgage. The market drove appreciation. The investor simply deployed capital strategically. Now leverage this across multiple properties. Instead of buying one property with $100,000 down, buy 5 properties with $20,000 down on each, using FHA loans or other low down payment financing. Each property appreciates. Each generates cash flow. The investor now has 5 wealth-generating machines instead of 1. Over 10 years, assuming consistent 5% appreciation, each $500,000 property becomes $814,000. Across 5 properties, that's $4.07 million in total property value. Subtract the remaining mortgage balances, about $2.8 million across all properties, and the investor's equity position stands at $1.27 million, all from a $100,000 initial investment. The tax code actively rewards this strategy. Real estate investors can deduct mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, repairs, and maintenance. They can also depreciate the building's value over 27.5 years for residential property, creating substantial paper losses that offset rental income and reduce tax liability. Even as the property appreciates in actual value, depreciation creates tax deductions. When an investor sells a property, they can defer all capital gains taxes through a 1031 exchange, rolling proceeds into new property. This allows wealth to compound without taxation interrupting the process. And if the investor holds properties until death, heirs inherit them with a stepped-up basis, eliminating all accumulated capital gains. This combination of leverage, appreciation, cash flow, and tax advantages makes real estate one of the most powerful wealth-building vehicles available to ordinary people. You don't need millions to start. You need knowledge of the rules and the discipline to apply them. Rule recognition number 3. The asset quality decision. Not all assets are created equal. The wealthy distinguish between assets that generate income, assets that appreciate in value, and assets that depreciate. A car is a depreciating asset, a wealth destroyer. The moment you drive it off the lot, it loses 20% of its value. Over 5 years, it loses 60% or more. You put money in, and the asset becomes less valuable. This is capital destruction. A house you live in is an appreciating asset, but it generates zero income unless you rent out rooms. It increases in value over time, building equity. This is wealth neutral to positive, depending on appreciation rates versus maintenance costs. A rental property is both appreciating and income generating, a wealth multiplier. It increases in value while also producing monthly cash flow. This is the ideal asset class. Stocks can be categorized similarly. A growth stock that pays no dividend appreciates in value but generates no income until sold. A dividend-paying stock appreciates while also producing quarterly cash flow. Dividend stocks are wealth multipliers, similar to rental real estate. The wealthy continually ask, does this asset put money in my pocket, grow in intrinsic value, or ideally both? A poor mindset decision treats all spending equally. I spent $1,000 on a car. I spent $1,000 on stocks. Same thing. A wealthy mindset categorizes every dollar deployed. I invested $1,000 in an asset expected to generate 10% annual returns, or I spent $1,000 on a depreciating liability. This categorization changes behavior completely. When you view a car as a depreciating liability, you buy the minimum vehicle necessary and allocate remaining capital to appreciating assets. When you view a house as an appreciating asset, you think strategically about home equity and whether it should be extracted and redeployed. When you view every purchase through the asset quality lens, consumption decreases and investment increases automatically. You're not depriving yourself. You're playing the game correctly. Here's something critical to understand about capital flow: how money moves through the economic system. Capital flows toward assets and away from consumption. Companies that reallocate capital toward value-creating businesses generate returns 30% higher than those that don't. The same principle applies personally. Every dollar not allocated toward income-generating or appreciating assets is a dollar flowing in the wrong direction. The wealthy obsessively track capital allocation. Where is money flowing? Toward consumption, capital destruction, or toward assets, capital creation? Elon Musk could spend billions on luxury consumption, yachts, private islands, collections of rare cars. He could live like a stereotypical billionaire, showcasing wealth through extravagant spending. Instead, he pledges Tesla shares as collateral to fund new ventures. He lives in a small, prefabricated house. His capital flows toward businesses that multiply value. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, the Boring Company, X. Jeff Bezos could have extracted massive dividends from Amazon starting in the late 1990s. He could have become wealthy through income extraction, living lavishly off Amazon's profits. Instead, he reinvested every dollar for decades, building AWS into a $100 billion annual revenue engine. His capital flowed toward business growth, not personal consumption. Bill Gates could have diversified entirely into bonds and conservative investments after leaving Microsoft, preserving wealth through ultra-safe vehicles. Instead, he maintained 60+% of his portfolio in equities, allowing aggressive capital growth. His capital flows toward appreciation, accepting volatility in exchange for long-term returns. Each of these individuals could justify extracting wealth for consumption. They've earned it. They've built incredible value. But they understand that capital flowing toward consumption is capital permanently destroyed. Capital flowing toward assets is capital that multiplies indefinitely. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. Money isn't for spending. Money is for deploying strategically to generate more money. Consumption is what you do with the excess returns, not with the principal. The wealthy live off returns. The poor consume principal. Now let's address something uncomfortable: why the poor don't play the game. It's not because they're lazy or unintelligent. It's because of structural barriers and psychological factors that are rarely discussed honestly. The access problem is real. When you have $1 million in assets, banks compete for your business. You can pledge assets as collateral for loans at 3 to 4% interest, then invest proceeds in opportunities returning 8 to 10%. You have access to private equity deals, merger opportunities, and insider networks where value is created before public markets price it in. When you have $10,000 in assets, you're shut out from most of this. You can't access institutional lending. You're relegated to credit cards at 20+% interest. You don't get invitations to conferences where deals are structured. You don't have financial advisors explaining tax-efficient strategies. You have bank tellers trying to sell you checking accounts. The wealthy attend wealth-building conferences where real estate syndicators present private deals. They join mastermind groups where members share investment opportunities. They have accountants and attorneys structuring their finances for maximum tax efficiency. They have access to information and opportunities that simply don't exist for the general population. This access gap is significant, but it's not insurmountable. The rules of the money game, leverage, compounding, capital allocation, asset appreciation, work at every wealth level. A person with $10,000 can't execute the exact strategies Elon Musk uses, but they can apply the same principles scaled appropriately. Start with a single rental property using an FHA loan with 3.5% down. That's accessible. Learn capital allocation by actively deciding where every dollar should flow. That's free. Understand compound interest by setting up automatic investments in index funds. That costs nothing. Study real estate appreciation by analyzing local market data. That's available online. The game is accessible. The rules are documented. What's missing is often the psychological belief that playing the game is even possible. The psychological barrier is actually larger than the access barrier. Most people fail to play the money game not because they can't understand the rules, but because they never internalize that the game exists. They see wealthy individuals and attribute success to luck, inheritance, or unethical behavior rather than systematic rule following. They've never been taught that Warren Buffett's wealth came from understanding capital allocation, or that Elon Musk's leverage strategy is legal and teachable, or that real estate appreciation is mathematical, not magical. They believe wealth is mysterious, accessible only to a chosen few, dependent on circumstances beyond their control. This belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe wealth is about luck, you don't study wealth-building strategies. If you believe the game is rigged, you don't try to learn the rules. If you believe your circumstances make wealth impossible, you never take the first step toward deploying capital strategically. The truth is more empowering and more challenging. The game exists, the rules are learnable, and outcomes are largely determined by how well you play. Luck matters, privilege matters, starting conditions matter, but knowledge and disciplined execution matter more over time. Robert and James had identical starting conditions, same family, same socioeconomic background, same education opportunities. The difference was knowledge of the rules and willingness to apply them. Robert learned the game and played it. James never knew the game existed. You're listening to this right now, which means you're different from James. You're seeking knowledge. You're learning the rules. The question is whether you'll apply them. Because knowledge without application is worthless. Understanding leverage means nothing if you never use it. Recognizing the power of compound interest means nothing if you never invest. Seeing the value of capital allocation means nothing if you never actively direct your capital. If you're serious about changing your financial trajectory, about moving from spectator to player, you need to commit right now to taking action. Not someday. Not when circumstances are perfect. Right now, today, this week. Open a brokerage account. Research your first rental property. Calculate your current capital allocation. Read a book on real estate investing. Take one concrete step toward playing the game. And stay connected to this channel, because I'm breaking down these strategies every single week. Next week, I'm diving deep into the specific tax strategies the wealthy use to minimize tax burden legally. The week after, I'm analyzing 3 real estate markets where appreciation and cash flow opportunities are converging right now. This isn't theoretical content, it's actionable intelligence. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. If you have subscribed, hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Because the difference between wealth and financial struggle often comes down to information, knowing what the wealthy know, doing what the wealthy do. Let me show you one more real-world example that perfectly illustrates how all these rules work together. The story of Sam Zell, the legendary real estate investor who built a fortune worth over $5 billion before his death in 2023. Zell started with almost nothing. His parents were Jewish immigrants who fled Poland during World War II. His father worked odd jobs. His mother was a homemaker. Zell's first taste of entrepreneurship came in college when he bought properties near the University of Michigan campus and rented them to students. He learned leverage immediately, using minimal down payments to control valuable assets. After law school, Zell could have pursued a traditional legal career, earning a solid 6-figure income. Instead, he focused on real estate investing, recognizing that asset appreciation would generate more wealth than trading time for legal fees. By the 1970s, he'd identified a massive opportunity: distressed real estate following the market crash. While everyone else was fleeing real estate, Zell went all in. He used leverage aggressively, acquiring properties at enormous discounts during market panic. He bought apartment buildings, office complexes, and retail centers when sellers were desperate. He understood a principle most investors miss: the best opportunities appear when everyone else is terrified. His leverage strategy was sophisticated. He'd acquire properties with minimal equity, typically 10 to 20% down, then use the property's cash flow to service debt while waiting for appreciation. When properties appreciated, he'd refinance and extract equity to buy more properties. This cycle repeated hundreds of times. By the 1980s, Zell controlled billions in real estate assets. His equity position was substantial, but small relative to total asset value, exactly the right ratio for maximizing returns through leverage. When real estate markets boomed in the 2000s, Zell's portfolio appreciated explosively. But here's what separated Zell from typical investors: capital allocation discipline. In 2007, at the absolute peak of the real estate bubble, Zell sold equity office properties to Blackstone for $39 billion, the largest private equity deal in history at the time. Everyone told him he was crazy. The market was still going up. Why sell? Zell understood market cycles and recognized that valuations had become detached from fundamentals. He liquidated at the top, converting his real estate holdings to cash. 18 months later, the real estate market collapsed. Property values plummeted 50% or more. Zell had preserved his wealth while others lost fortunes. Then he waited. As the market crashed and panic spread, Zell did what he'd always done. He went shopping. He acquired distressed properties at Depression-era prices. He used the same leverage strategies he'd perfected over decades, controlling valuable assets with minimal equity during maximum pessimism. By 2010, as markets recovered, Zell's portfolio appreciated dramatically. Properties purchased for 30 cents on the dollar returned to normal valuations. A $50 million acquisition became a $150 million asset within 5 years. Multiply that across dozens of properties, and you understand how Zell rebuilt his fortune larger than before. This case study illustrates every rule we've discussed: leverage to control assets beyond available capital, compound appreciation over decades, capital allocation to shift from overvalued to undervalued assets, time preference, willingness to wait for opportunities, asset appreciation instead of income generation, tax efficiency through property exchanges and depreciation. Zell didn't just get lucky. He played the game masterfully for 50 years, and the rules he followed are the same rules available to anyone willing to learn them. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to say clearly. Most people will hear everything I've explained today and do absolutely nothing with it. They'll nod along, agree intellectually, maybe even feel motivated for a few hours. Then they'll return to their regular patterns. They'll keep optimizing for income instead of assets. They'll keep avoiding leverage because debt feels scary. They'll keep making passive capital allocation decisions. Why? Because knowledge without action is just entertainment. Understanding the rules intellectually doesn't change your life. Applying the rules consistently over years and decades changes your life. The difference between people who build wealth and people who stay stuck isn't intelligence. It's not even knowledge. It's willingness to act on knowledge despite uncertainty, despite fear, despite social pressure to follow conventional paths. When Robert bought his first rental property at age 28, his friends thought he was insane. He had student loans. He was stretching his finances dangerously thin with a 3.5% down payment. What if tenants didn't pay? What if the property declined in value? What if he lost his job and couldn't cover the mortgage? All valid concerns, all possible risks. But Robert understood that risk-adjusted returns favor action over inaction. Yes, buying a rental property with maximum leverage carried risk, but not building wealth carried greater long-term risk: the risk of working until 70, the risk of financial dependence, the risk of never achieving freedom. James avoided risk completely. He saved conservatively, paid off debt aggressively, never leveraged anything. He felt safe, and in some sense he was safer in the short term, but over 30 years, his conservative approach created the greatest risk of all: insufficient wealth to retire comfortably, continued dependence on employment income, limited options. The wealthy understand that the biggest risk is not playing the game. Avoiding volatility feels safe, but it guarantees mediocre outcomes. Avoiding leverage feels responsible, but it limits returns mathematically. Following conventional wisdom feels comfortable, but conventional wisdom produces conventional results. You have to decide right now which game you're playing. Are you playing for safety and comfort, accepting limited returns, or are you playing to win, accepting volatility and risk in exchange for wealth-building potential? There's no wrong answer, but there is a cost to each choice, and you can't play both games simultaneously. You can't use maximum leverage while avoiding all risk. You can't build extraordinary wealth using conventional strategies. You can't achieve different results while doing the same things everyone else does. So let me ask you directly, what's stopping you? What's the real barrier between where you are financially and where you want to be? Is it knowledge? You now know the rules: leverage, compounding, capital allocation, asset appreciation, tax efficiency. You understand how the wealthy think and operate differently. Knowledge isn't your barrier anymore. Is it capital? You don't need millions to start. FHA loans allow 3.5% down on rental properties. Brokerage accounts have zero minimum investments. Real estate investment trusts provide real estate exposure with $100. Starting capital isn't the barrier. Is it time? Compounding requires time, but the best time to start was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. Waiting another year doesn't solve the time problem, it makes it worse. Time isn't the barrier. Is it fear? This is the real barrier for most people. Fear of making mistakes, fear of losing money, fear of looking foolish, fear of complexity, fear of deviating from what's familiar and conventional. Fear is legitimate, but understand what fear is actually protecting you from. It's not protecting you from catastrophic loss. Proper leverage and diversification manage that risk. Fear is protecting you from discomfort, from uncertainty, from having to learn new skills and think differently. And that's a trade-off. Temporary discomfort and uncertainty in exchange for long-term wealth building. Most people choose comfort. That's why most people never build substantial wealth. The wealthy choose temporary discomfort because they understand it's the price of admission to the game. If you're still watching at this point, you're different. You've invested an hour learning these principles. You're seeking knowledge that most people never encounter. The question is whether you'll take the next step, whether you'll convert knowledge into action. Here's what that looks like practically. This week, before this Sunday, take one concrete action toward playing the money game. Not eventually. This week, open a brokerage account and set up automatic monthly investments. Research rental properties in your area and calculate potential returns. Read a book on real estate investing or capital allocation. Calculate your current net worth and capital allocation across asset classes. Identify one expense you can eliminate to redirect capital toward investments. Choose one action. Execute it this week. Then next week, take another action. Then another. Build momentum through small, consistent steps. That's how wealth is built, not through massive overnight changes, but through disciplined daily and weekly decisions compounded over years. And continue learning. The rules I've shared today are fundamental, but there's depth to each one. Leverage has nuances. Capital allocation requires judgment. Tax strategy has complexity. Real estate investing has regional variations. You need ongoing education to refine your execution. That's why this channel exists. Every week I break down specific strategies, analyze real-world case studies, and explain how the wealthy operate. I cover tax strategies, investment vehicles, real estate markets, business building, mindset shifts, everything necessary to play the money game at a high level. If you found value in today's deep dive, if you're starting to see money differently, if you're committed to playing the game instead of watching from the sidelines, then you need to be part of this community. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button to tell the algorithm this content matters. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone stuck in the income trap, someone optimizing for the wrong game, someone who doesn't know the rules exist. Because here's the final truth. The money game is winnable, but only if you know you're playing it. The rules are documented. The strategies are proven. The mathematics are certain. What's uncertain is whether you'll apply what you've learned. Warren Buffett publishes his capital allocation philosophy in annual shareholder letters, available free online. Elon Musk's leverage strategies are public filings with the SEC, searchable by anyone. Bill Gates discusses his investment approach in interviews and articles, accessible to everyone. Real estate appreciation follows historical patterns, documented by federal agencies. Compound interest can be calculated with simple formulas, taught in high school math. The game isn't hidden. The rules aren't secret. The strategies aren't reserved for an elite few. The only barrier is awareness that the game exists and willingness to play it. You now have awareness. You understand that money is a game with specific rules. You know those rules. You've seen how they create wealth for those who apply them, and how ignoring them keeps people trapped financially. The question isn't whether you can play the game. The question is whether you will. Whether you'll take action this week, whether you'll maintain discipline over months and years, whether you'll think differently about money, time, assets, and capital allocation. Robert and James started identically. They diverged based on knowledge and application. You and the person sitting next to you, metaphorically speaking, are starting from wherever you're starting. Where you end up depends entirely on what you do next. The wealthy know the rules and play accordingly. They understand that money should work for them, that leverage multiplies returns, that capital allocation matters more than income, and that time horizon is destiny. They live these principles daily. They make every financial decision through this framework. You can do the same. Starting today, starting this week, starting with one concrete action toward playing the game correctly. The money game is happening all around you right now, every moment. People are building wealth through leverage while others pay off mortgages early. Capital is flowing toward appreciating assets while others hold cash. Compound interest is working for some while working against others. The game never stops. The question is only whether you're playing it consciously or unconsciously, strategically or randomly to win or simply to survive. I've given you the rules, I've shown you how they work in practice. I've illustrated them through real-world examples of people who've built extraordinary wealth by applying these exact principles. The rest is up to you. This is William Vanderbilt, and you've just learned how the money game is really played. The question now is what you're going to do with that knowledge. I'll see you next week with another deep dive into the strategies the wealthy use. Until then, take action, play the game, build wealth, and remember, the only way to lose is to not play at all.